In 1848, after the Mexican-American War, California passed from Mexican to American hands. Soon after, gold was discovered in the north, bringing a rush of miners onto the lands of interior nations who had been out of the reach of coastal missions and Mexican ranches.
The majority of tribes are kept in constant fear on account of the indiscriminate and inhuman massacre of their people. They have become alarmed by the increased flood of immigration, much spread over their country. It is just incomprehensible to them. Adam Johnson, Indian agent.
Miners came into Indian communities looking for women. Vigilante parties opened fire on men, women, and children, wiping out entire villages. It was open season on Indian people, derisively referred to as diggers.
The Humboldt Times, Eureka, April 11. Headline, Good Haul of Diggers. 1 white man killed, 38 bucks killed, 40 squaws and children taken.
January 17th, headline, Good Haul of Diggers. Band exterminated.
In the 1850s, while the American nation was on the verge of civil war over the issue of slavery, demand for agricultural labor in California was so high that the state legislature passed an act legalizing Indian slavery.
A company of United States troops, attended by a considerable volunteer force, has been pursuing the poor creatures from one retreat to another. The kidnappers follow at the heels of the soldiers to seize the children when their parents are murdered and sell them to the best advantage. W.P. Dole, Indian agent.
Only 30,000 native Californians survived the gold rush. 10% of what had been the most densely populated Indian area north of Mexico.
Upon my last visit to Ventura, I saw the last of the Ventura Indians. They were living in a tiny hut east of the mouth of the river. One of the old men told me they were very glad that I was not ashamed to talk the Indian language. They told me to continue in the use of it and keep the beliefs. If I did so, I would live a long time. Fernando Librado, Shumash.
Fernando Librado lived to be 111 years old.
I once went over to Dona Siana's house. I wanted to learn the swordfish dance. After the meal, I asked her to teach me the old dances, saying, "For you are the only ones left who know the old dances." Dona Siana began to cry, and I left saying nothing more. Fernando Librado, Shumash.
For thousands of years, the buffalo thundered across the Great Plains, a vast sea of grassland rising from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Living off the herds were a scattering of nomadic Indian nations.
My grandmother told me that when she was young, the people themselves had to walk. In those times, they did not travel far nor often.
In 1680, the Spanish were driven out of the Southwest by the Pueblo nations. As they fled, they left behind their horse herds, an animal that would change the way of life for Indian nations across the continent.
When they got horses, they could move more easily from place to place. Then they could kill more of the buffalo and other animals. And so they got more meat for food and gathered more skins for lodges and clothing. Iron Teeth, Cheyenne.
A new culture developed based on the relationship between man and horse.
My horse fights with me, and he fasts with me. Because if he is to carry me into battle, he must know my heart, and I must know his, or we shall never become brothers. I've been told that the white man, who is almost a god, and yet a great fool, does not believe that the horse has a spirit. This cannot be true. I have many times seen my horse's soul in his eyes. Plenty coo, crow.
With the coming of the horse, the nations of the plains would become legendary. The Crow, Cheyenne, Sioux, Blackfeet, Arapaho, Pawnee, Kiowa, Comanche, and for generations, their way of life flourished. Then in 1858, gold was discovered at Pikes Peak, Colorado. 4 years later, the Homestead Act opened the region to white settlement. Almost instantly, the invasion became a flood. In 1 year alone, 100,000 immigrants swarmed across the plains over 2 main roads, spreading a wide swath of destruction. To protect travel on the immigrant roads, the United States erected a network of forts across the plains and churned out cadets at West Point specially trained for Indian warfare. It was the Army's mission to force mobile nations who hunted over large territories onto confined areas, reservations. Indian people were faced with only 2 options: to give up their homelands and way of life, or fight the American army. Although some chose armed resistance, many Indian leaders responsible for the protection of large villages of women, children, and elderly saw little hope in fighting. Among these were 2 Cheyenne leaders, Black Kettle and White Antelope. They were willing to give up lands to maintain peace and bring their people safely through the dangerous era.